There's a specific kind of silence that happens when you walk into a room and three people stop talking at the same time. Not because they were saying anything cruel, just because your presence has reminded them that some conversations have an audience they hadn't accounted for. I learned to recognize that silence on a Tuesday in October, 3 years into my marriage, standing in the doorway of my own kitchen with a grocery bag in each hand. My husband's sister, Lena, was sitting at my table. My mother-in-law, Diane, was at the counter with a coffee mug that I had bought from a set I had chosen that had never been anyone else's. My husband, Paul, was leaning against the refrigerator with his arms crossed in that way he has when he is trying to look casual and is failing at it. They were looking at a piece of paper spread across the table. I saw numbers, a list, a calendar. "We were just talking about Lena's situation," Diane said. The kind of smile that is already asking you to be reasonable before you have said anything. I set the grocery bags down. I said, "What situation?" Lena looked at Paul. Paul looked at the floor. The floor was mine too, for the record. Wide plank oak that I had sanded and stained myself over an August weekend, while Paul was at a work conference. I had the blisters to prove it, still healing on my palms. This is what I learned that night. Lena had been evicted from her apartment. She had known for 6 weeks. She had told Paul 6 weeks ago. They had been discussing options for 6 weeks, and the option they had landed on, sometime in the 48 hours before I walked in with my grocery bags, was that Lena would move into our spare bedroom for a few months, just until she got back on her feet. No one had asked me. Not because they forgot, because they had decided, collectively, that my answer would be yes, and that asking would only introduce the possibility of a different answer. You cannot be told no if you never ask the question. This is the logic of people who have already decided that your consent is a formality, and formalities can be skipped when time is short and someone's need is urgent. I stood in my kitchen, with the eggs getting warm in the bag, and I said, "How long is a few months?" 3, maybe 4, Lena said. She was 32. She had been evicted 3 times in the 7 years I had known her. Each time it was someone else's fault. A landlord who didn't understand, a roommate who backed out, a job that ended unexpectedly. Each time, Paul had fixed it. Each time I had watched him fix it and said nothing, because she was his sister, and he loved her. And I had not yet learned that love without boundaries is not love. It is just consumption with a kinder name. 3 to 4 months, I said. "You're not going to even know I'm here," Lena said. She was already wearing my sweater, a cream-colored cashmere one that had been a gift from my own sister that I kept folded on a specific shelf in my closet that she had somehow found and put on without opening a single drawer, because she had not, in fact, unpacked anything. She had just arrived with 2 suitcases and started occupying. I looked at Paul. He did not meet my eyes. He looked at the piece of paper on the table, the list of numbers, the plan they had made in my kitchen without me. "Okay," I said. That was the first mistake. Not the biggest, but the first one. The week after Lena moved in, my father had a stroke. I flew to Ohio on a Wednesday. I was gone 12 days. When I came back, the spare bedroom had become Lena's room. There was a sign on the door, a plant in the window, a new lock on the inside, which she had installed without asking, because she said she needed privacy. My home had been rearranged while I was standing at my father's bedside, holding his hand while the machines beeped and the nurses came and went, and my mother sat in the corner with a magazine she had been holding upside down for 3 hours. I did not say anything. I was too tired. I was the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and makes everything look slightly underwater. I told myself I would address it later. I told myself I needed to focus on my father. I told myself that Lena was temporary and my family was permanent, and I could survive a few months of being a ghost in my own home. That was the second mistake. Have you ever come back to a place that was supposed to be yours and realized in the first 5 minutes that you were no longer the person it belonged to? That someone else had exhaled into every corner and left their shape in it? Tell me in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because what happened over the next 8 weeks is the reason I stopped being the person who says okay and started being the person who says no. My name is Eleanor. I am 34 years old. I have been married to Paul for 5 years, and together with him for 8. I am an architect, not the kind who designs houses, the kind who designs commercial spaces, which means I spend my professional life thinking about how people move through environments and where the pinch points are. I say this because it matters. I am trained to notice when a space is not working. I am trained to see the places where flow is blocked, where someone has claimed territory that was never allocated to them, where the original intention of a design has been overwritten by someone who simply started using a room differently and never stopped. I did not, for 8 years, apply this training to my own marriage. Paul is 41. He's a high school history teacher. He is beloved by his students, patient with their questions, endlessly willing to stay after class to help someone who is struggling. He is the kind of person who volunteers to coach the debate team and stays up late writing recommendation letters and never once complains about the grading that piles up on weekends. He is a good man. I want to be very clear about that, because this story is not about a villain. It is about a good man who learned, before I met him, that his role in his family was to be the one who fixes things, and who had never once asked whether the things he was fixing were actually fixable, or whether the cost of fixing them was being paid by someone else. Lena is 32. She is charming. This is the most important thing to understand about her. When you meet Lena, you like her immediately. She laughs easily, she remembers small details about your life. She makes you feel seen. This is not a performance. She genuinely likes people. She genuinely wants to connect. The problem is that her wanting and her doing are not connected by the same bridge that works for most people. She wants to be stable, but she does not do the things that create stability. She wants to have money, but she does not do the things that generate money. She wants to be independent, but she does not do independence. She does need. And need in Lena is a force of nature. Beautiful to watch from a distance, catastrophic to stand in front of. The pattern started long before I arrived. Paul told me about it in pieces, over years. The way people tell you about something they have not yet recognized as a pattern. Lena dropped out of college in her second year. Paul co-signed a loan for her to go back. She dropped out again. Paul paid the loan himself. Lena lost a job. Paul gave her money. Lena got a new job. Paul helped with the deposit on an apartment. Lena lost the new job. Paul helped with the next deposit anyway. Each time, the story was slightly different. Each time, the circumstances were presented as unique, unprecedented, the kind of thing that could happen to anyone. And each time, Paul wrote a check or made a call or cleared his weekend to drive 4 hours and pack her things into boxes and bring her somewhere new. I watched this for 8 years from a carefully maintained distance. I had rules. I did not lend Lena money myself. I did not offer solutions unless directly asked. I did not, after the first 2 years, allow myself to feel responsible for her outcomes. These rules worked. They kept me sane. They kept my marriage functional. They allowed me to love Paul without resenting him for loving his sister, which he did, genuinely, and which I did not want to be the person who stood in the way of. But the rules did not account for Lena moving into my house. They did not account for the slow, almost invisible process of a person colonizing a space that does not belong to them. Not through malice, through the simple, relentless pressure of existing somewhere without being asked to leave. A sweater borrowed one day becomes a sweater worn every day, becomes a sweater that is no longer yours. A drawer emptied for guest towels becomes a drawer full of someone else's socks, becomes a drawer you no longer open. A chair moved to face the television becomes the chair your sister-in-law sits in every night, becomes a chair that is not yours anymore, even though you bought it, even though you chose the fabric, even though you can still remember the afternoon you found it in a shop on Beacon Street and knew immediately that it was the one. The first time I understood that something was structurally wrong, not just annoying, not just inconvenient, but wrong, was 3 weeks after Lena moved in. I came home from work and found that she had rearranged my kitchen. Not the whole kitchen, just enough. The spices were no longer alphabetical. The pots were no longer stacked by size. My grandmother's cast iron skillet, the one with the handle that fits my hand exactly, the one my mother gave me when I got my first apartment, the one I have cooked 1,000 meals in, was on the bottom shelf of a cabinet I never use, behind a colander I had forgotten I owned. I put it back. I said nothing. I wrote it down. That is the part of the story I have not told anyone until now. The writing it down, the keeping a record. Not because I planned to use it, because I am an architect, and architects keep records. And somewhere in the part of my brain that calculates load and stress and the weight a structure can bear before it fails, I already knew what was coming. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The second time I understood was 6 weeks in, when Paul came home from a faculty meeting and I asked him, gently, whether we had talked about a timeline for Lena finding her own place. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not defensive, not dismissive, but genuinely confused, as if the question itself did not compute.
She's family, he said. We don't put timelines on family. That was the moment I stopped being confused about what was happening. Confusion is a luxury. It means you still believe the situation will resolve itself in a way that makes sense. I no longer believed that. I understood in that moment that Paul and I were not having the same conversation. He thought we were talking about hospitality. I was talking about sovereignty. He thought we were talking about how long. I was talking about whether I still lived in my own home. I did not say any of this out loud. I said, okay. And I went upstairs and opened a new document on my laptop and wrote, Week 6, asked about timeline. Paul, we don't put timelines on family. No agreement to a specific date. That document would grow to 23 pages. I still have it. I will never delete it. Not because I need it anymore, but because I need to remember what it felt like to build a case against the slow erasure of my own life, one entry at a time, while smiling and making dinner and folding laundry and being the person everyone thought was fine. Because I was not fine. I was just quiet. And there is a difference.
Week 7 was when the pace changed. Lena had found a job, a good one, at a boutique marketing firm with benefits and a desk, and a woman named Janice who seemed to genuinely want to mentor her. I was relieved. Not because I wanted Lena to succeed for her own sake, though I did, genuinely, but because I thought a job meant momentum, and momentum meant movement, and movement meant she would eventually move out. I was wrong. On a Wednesday in week 7, I came home to find that she had painted the spare bedroom a soft sage green, without asking, without mentioning it. She had gone to the hardware store, chosen a color, bought the supplies, and painted an entire room in my house while I was at work. The walls were still wet when I walked in. The smell of fresh paint was everywhere. Lena was standing in the middle of the room with a roller in her hand, wearing my sweater, the cream cashmere one, the one from my sister. And she smiled when she saw me. "What do you think?" she said. "It was so beige in here. I just thought it needed some life." I stood in the doorway of a room that no longer looked like any room I had ever seen in my own house. The green was pretty. That was almost worse. If it had been ugly, I could have been angry. But it was nice. It was warm. It was the kind of color someone chooses when they are planning to stay. "What do you think?" she said again, and there was something in her voice that I had never heard before. Not quite a challenge, not quite a test, but something. A small shift in the air pressure of the room. A question that was not really a question. "What do you think?" she said. "It was so beige in here. I just thought it needed some life." I stood in the doorway of a room that no longer looked like any room I had ever seen in my own house. The green was pretty. That was almost worse. If it had been ugly, I could have been angry. But it was nice. It was warm. It was the kind of color someone chooses when they are planning to stay. "What do you think?" she said again, and there was something in her voice that I had never heard before. Not quite a challenge, not quite a test, but something. A small shift in the air pressure of the room. A question that was not really a question. "It's nice," I said, and I went downstairs and I poured a glass of wine and I sat in my chair, still in its corner, still mine, though I was starting to understand that this was not guaranteed. And I opened the document on my phone and I wrote, "Week 7. Lena painted the spare bedroom. Sage green. Did not ask. Described the room as needing life." The next day, I called my friend Mira. Mira is a family law attorney. She is also the only person I know who has ever told her own mother-in-law to leave her house and meant it, and I have always admired that about her. We met for coffee at a place near my office, a neutral location where I was unlikely to run into anyone who knew Paul. I told her everything. The sweater, the kitchen reorganization, the timeline conversation, the paint. I told her about the document on my phone, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Show me the document," she said. I handed her my phone. She read for about 4 minutes. Then she looked up at me with an expression I have come to recognize as Mira's "I am about to tell you something you don't want to hear" face. "Eleanor," she said, "you have been documenting the slow repossession of your home by a third party for 7 weeks. You have multiple instances of property being used without permission. You have a verbal agreement, the marriage itself, that implies joint decision-making authority over the household. And you have a husband who, by your own account, has explicitly refused to set a timeline for this person's departure. I know, I said. Do you know what this is? She said. Tell me.
This is a pattern of conduct that, in a different legal context, would be called something very specific. She set the phone down on the table between us. I'm not saying you need to do anything about it yet, but I need you to understand what you're describing. You're describing someone who is systematically erasing your presence from your own home, and your husband is either unwilling or unable to stop it. I stared at the coffee in my cup. It had gone cold. What do I do? I said. 2 things, Mira said. First, you stop being quiet. Not loud, not aggressive. But you stop absorbing things in silence. You start saying, that doesn't work for me. And you let the sentence stand without softening it. Second, you tell Paul clearly and directly that you need a date, not a conversation about a date. A date. And if he cannot give you one, you need to decide what that means. I paid for the coffee. I went back to work. I sat at my desk for 3 hours and did not do a single productive thing because my brain was too busy turning over the phrase systematically erasing your presence and trying to figure out how I had let it happen without noticing. But I had noticed. That was the thing. I had noticed every single thing. I had just told myself that noticing was enough, that awareness was the same as action, that if I could see what was happening, somehow that meant I was in control of it.
I was not in control of it. I was just watching. And watching is not the same as doing. Week 8 was when I stopped watching. I chose a Thursday. I had learned over the previous 8 weeks that Thursdays were the best day for difficult conversations. Not Mondays, when everyone is still shaking off the weekend. Not Fridays, when everyone is already halfway out the door. Thursdays are the day when the week has settled into something predictable, but there is still time before the weekend to absorb whatever needs absorbing. I asked Paul if we could talk after dinner. Just the 2 of us. I said it casually, the way you say something when you have already decided that the outcome is not negotiable, and you are simply going through the motions of making it feel like a conversation. He said yes. He looked curious, but not worried. This was the advantage of having been quiet for 8 weeks. He had no reason to be worried. I had never given him one. Lena was at a work event that night, a networking dinner that Janice had encouraged her to attend. I had checked. I had started checking things like this, quietly, without announcing it to anyone. I had started being strategic in ways that would have embarrassed me 6 months ago, when I still believed that direct communication was always the answer, and that people who loved you would automatically consider your needs without being forced to. I made a simple dinner. Pasta, a salad, the bread that Paul likes from the bakery on the corner. We ate at the kitchen table, the one I had chosen, the one I had refinished myself during a month when Paul was traveling for a teaching conference. We talked about his students, about a project I was struggling with at work. About nothing, mostly. The easy surface of a marriage that looked, from the outside, like it was working. After dinner, I cleared the plates. I made tea. I sat down across from him at the table, and I placed the document on the surface between us. It was not 23 pages. I had condensed it. I had learned, from my work as an architect, that decision makers do not read 23 pages. They read summaries. They read the version of the truth that has been distilled into something they cannot look away from. I had spent 2 evenings distilling 8 weeks into 4 pages. The dates, the incidents, the paint, the sweater, the lock on the door, the kitchen reorganization, the timeline conversation, the "we don't put timelines on family." "What's this?" Paul said. He did not reach for it. He looked at it the way you look at something you already know you do not want to touch. "This is a record," I said, "of what has happened in this house since Lena moved in." "I don't understand." "I know you don't," I said. "That's why I wrote it down. Because I need you to see it the way I have been seeing it. Not in pieces. Not one thing at a time, where each thing is small enough to explain away. All of it together." He reached for the pages. He read. I watched his face. I had been practicing for this moment for 8 weeks, running different versions of it in my head, trying to anticipate everything he might say so that I would not be caught off guard. But I had not anticipated the expression that actually appeared on his face, which was not denial or anger or defensiveness. It was confusion, genuine confusion. The look of someone who is reading about a reality he did not know existed. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "are you saying you've been keeping a file on my sister?" "I'm saying I've been keeping a record of what has happened in my own home," I said, "because no one else was keeping one. Because you were not seeing it. Because every time something happened, you explained it away or didn't notice it at all. And I was left standing in the aftermath of it, alone, trying to decide whether I was overreacting." "The paint," he said. He was staring at that entry. Week 7. Lena painted the spare bedroom. Sage green. Did not ask. "She didn't ask you?" he said. "She didn't ask anyone," I said. "She went to the hardware store, bought the supplies, and painted a room in our house while we were both at work." "Paul, if I had done that in someone else's home, what would you call it?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew. "The lock on the door," he said. Reading. Week 4. Lena installed a lock on the spare bedroom door. Did not ask. Did not provide a key to either of us. "She said she needed privacy," he said. But his voice was different now. The confusion was still there, but something else was joining it. Something that looked, from where I was sitting, like the first faint crack in a wall he had been building for 32 years. "Paul," I said. I waited until he looked up at me. "I am not asking you to choose between me and your sister. I am asking you to see what has happened, and I am telling you that it cannot continue." "She's family," he said. But this time, the words sounded different. They sounded like a reflex rather than a conviction. The kind of thing you say because you have always said it, not because you have examined it and decided it is true. "Paul," I said, "I am also family. I am your wife. I have been your wife for 5 years. And for 8 weeks, I have been watching my home become someone else's home. And I have been watching you not notice. That is not sustainable. That is not a marriage. That is me being quiet while my life gets smaller so that your sister's life can get easier." He put the pages down. He put his head in his hands. He stayed like that for a long time. Long enough that the tea went cold and the light through the kitchen window shifted from gold to gray. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "What do you need?" he said. It was the first time in 8 weeks that anyone had asked me that question.
30 days, I said. Paul looked at me across the kitchen table. The document was still spread between us. 4 pages of evidence that my home had been slowly, quietly taken from me while I stood in the corners and watched. 30 days for Lena to find another place, I said. Not a conversation about a plan, not a soft deadline that we will extend because she's having a hard time. 30 days. In writing, with a specific move-out date. That's... He stopped himself. That's what? I said. I was gonna say that's fast, he said. But I'm realizing I don't actually know what's reasonable anymore. I don't know what I should have been seeing. I reached across the table and took his hand. Not because I was softening the moment, but because I wanted him to feel that I was still here, still choosing him, even while I was drawing a line that would change the shape of his relationship with his sister forever. Paul, I said, I love you. I have loved you for 8 years, but I have spent 8 weeks sleeping in a house that does not feel like mine, and I cannot do it anymore. I need you to hear that. Not as a threat, as a fact. He squeezed my hand. He nodded. And then he did something that I did not expect. He picked up his phone and texted Lena. Can you come home? We need to talk. She arrived about 40 minutes later, still in her work clothes, carrying a tote bag from the networking event. She looked from Paul to me and back again, and I watched her read the room in the way that only people who have spent their lives managing other people's perceptions can do. She knew something was different. She just didn't know what.
Sit down, Paul said. He did not say it unkindly, but he did not say it the way he usually said things to Lena, which was softly, carefully, as though she were made of something that might break. This was different. This was the voice of someone who had decided something. Lena sat. She looked at the pages on the table. She did not pick them up. She did not ask what they were. I think she already knew. Lena, Paul said, I need you to find a new place to live. You have 30 days. There was a silence. Not the kind of silence that happens when people are thinking. The kind of silence that happens when someone has been hit with something they did not expect, and their brain is scrambling to catch up. What? She said. 30 days, Paul said again. Eleanor and I have talked about it. We need the room back. We need our home back. Lena looked at me, and for the first time in 8 weeks, I saw something in her face that I had never seen before. Not guilt, not shame. Something closer to surprise, as if it had genuinely never occurred to her that I might have a limit. You're kicking me out? She said. Not to Paul, to me. I'm asking you to find your own place, I said. There's a difference. Is there? She said. And there was an edge in her voice now, the sharpness of someone who is used to being accommodated and has just realized that the accommodation has been withdrawn. Lena, Paul said. His voice was steady. You painted a room in our house without asking. You installed a lock on a door and didn't give us a key. You've been wearing Eleanor's clothes without asking. You've been moving furniture, reorganizing cabinets, treating this house like it was yours. And I let you. I let all of it happen because I didn't want to have a hard conversation. But that's over now. She stared at him. I watched her process the information, not as someone who was hearing it for the first time, but as someone who had known it all along and had simply assumed it would never be spoken aloud. I didn't think you minded, she said, to me, quietly. I know you didn't,
I said. That's the problem.
The conversation lasted another hour. There were tears. From Lena, not from me. There were moments when I thought Paul might soften, might offer an extension, might do what he had always done and make it easier for her at my expense. But he did not. He held the line. I watched him do it, and I realized that this was the first time in 8 years I had seen him choose me over her. Not in theory, but in practice. Not in words, but in the uncomfortable, necessary work of saying no to someone he loved. Lena moved out on a Saturday in December. She found a studio apartment in a building about 15 minutes away, a place she had found herself, with a deposit she had saved herself, during a month when Paul and I had both made a point of not offering to help. She packed her things over 3 days. The desk, the lamp, the prints on the walls. The sage green paint stayed because I decided I liked it, and because repainting felt like erasing evidence of something I needed to remember. She took the cream cashmere sweater with her. I let her keep it. It was a small price.
The first weekend after Lena moved out, Paul and I painted the spare bedroom a different color. Not because I hated the sage green, because I needed to do something physical to reclaim the space. I chose a color called October Mist, a soft, grayed blue that reminds me of the sky in late autumn, when the light is thin and clear and you can see forever. We painted together on a Sunday, with the windows open and music playing and no one else in the house. It took 6 hours. By the end, my shoulders ached and there was paint in my hair, and Paul had a streak of blue across his forehead that made him look ridiculous. I laughed. He laughed. It was the first time in months that I had laughed in that room. We did not talk about Lena that day. We did not talk about the document or the 30 days or any of it. We just painted and ordered pizza and sat on the floor of the newly blue room eating slices off paper plates. And it felt like the beginning of something, rather than the end. Therapy started in January. Paul found the therapist, a woman named Dr. Avery, who specializes in family systems and enmeshment, which is the clinical term for what happens when a family stops knowing where one person ends and another begins. I learned that word in our 3rd session, enmeshment. It means boundaries so blurred that no one can tell whose feelings belong to whom, whose needs are whose life is whose. That was us. That was Paul and Lena. That was me, standing on the outside of something I could not see clearly because I was too busy being absorbed by it. Dr. Avery asked Paul a question in our 5th session that I have never forgotten. She said, "If Lena calls tomorrow and says she needs to move back in, what do you say?" Paul was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I say no." "Why?" Dr. Avery said. "Because my wife lives there," he said, "and my wife needs a home that is hers." I cried in that session, not because I was sad, because I had been waiting 8 years to hear someone say that out loud, and I had not known until I heard it how much I needed it.
Lena and I have what I would call a functional relationship now. She comes for dinner once a month. She does not borrow things without asking. She does not rearrange my kitchen. She does not refer to any room in my house as hers. We talk about her job, her new apartment, a man she has been seeing who seems to be good for her in ways that her previous partners were not. The conversations are pleasant. They are not deep. I do not need them to be. She has not apologized for what happened. I have not asked her to. I have learned that some people cannot apologize because apologizing would require them to admit that they knew what they were doing. And I am not sure Lena knew. I am not sure she is capable of knowing. I have made peace with that. Not because I am generous, because holding space for her apology would mean keeping the wound open.
and I am done keeping it open. Paul and I are better now than we were before. Not because Lena moved out. That was just the surface fix. Because we learned, in the months that followed, how to have the conversations we had been avoiding. How to say, this is not working for me, without wrapping it in layers of apology. How to sit in the discomfort of disagreement without immediately trying to resolve it. How to be two separate people who choose each other, rather than two people who have merged into something that cannot tell its own edges.
I still have the document, 23 pages. I open it sometimes when I am feeling uncertain about whether I overreacted, whether I was too harsh, whether I should have just been more patient. I read the entries, the paint, the lock, the sweater, the we don't put timelines on family. And I remember, I was not overreacting. I was reacting exactly as much as the situation required. I had just been trained for years to believe that my reactions were the problem. Here is what I know now that I wish I had known then. Your home is not a resource to be drawn on by anyone who needs it more than you do in the moment. Your patience is not an infinite well. Your silence is not kindness, not to yourself, and not to the people who need to hear the truth about what they are doing. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to mean it. You are allowed to document the things that are happening to you, not because you are preparing for a war, but because the act of writing something down is the act of refusing to let it disappear. If you are living in a situation where someone is slowly, quietly making your life smaller, a sister-in-law, a mother, a friend, a partner, I need you to hear this. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are not being difficult. You are noticing.
And noticing is the first step. The next step is speaking. The step after that is acting. And the step after that is coming home to a room that is yours, painted the color you chose with no one else's things on the shelves. I have 3 questions for you. First, is there someone in your life right now who is treating your space, physical or emotional, as though it belongs to them? Second, what is one thing you have stopped doing or stopped having because you were trying to be accommodating? And third, if you could say one thing to the version of yourself who is still saying okay when they mean no, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe if you haven't. Take care of your home. And I will see you in the next one.